What's going on, guys? It's JaxTown here. Welcome back to another video. Now in today's video, because the NFL season is ramping up, it's getting really good. We're in week 7. Things are starting to matter. We're going to be talking about the NFL, and more specifically, not just any NFL football, fantasy football. Now, every NFL fan knows that fantasy football is almost as important to them, if not just as important, as their actual NFL team. So not only on Sundays are you following your favorite team, you're also following your fantasy players and seeing if you can take down your father-in-law or your mother-in-law or whoever. I don't care. But the point is that fantasy football is huge and everyone knows about it. So today we're going to be talking about the hugest of these performances. So here are 7 greatest fantasy football performances of the 21st century. Here you go. All right, guys, before we start, just 2 quick rules. Number 1, we're going to have the scoring be half point per reception because I feel like receptions matter a lot in fantasy scoring. I think they should matter, but if it's 1 point per reception, then it's going to give an advantage to receivers, so it'll be like all receivers on this list. So that's the first rule. And then the second rule is let's keep it in the 21st century because we want to keep it modern. There's been so many games in the past, so let's just keep it in the 21st century. But other than that, let's start this list. All right, guys, starting off at number 7 is going to be Michael Vick, November 15, 2010. Arguably one of the most memorable quarterback performances in real life or fantasy football. Michael Vick might have had his best season in the pros in 2010, highlighted by his Week 10 performance on Monday Night Football versus the Redskins. On the day the Redskins signed quarterback Donovan McNabb to a large extension, it was Mike Vick showing he was the boss in a 59-28 blowout, now known as the Monday Night Massacre, compiling 333 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns on 20 for 28 completions. But what made this an all-time great fantasy game was the fact that he also rushed for 80 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns, totaling a ridiculous 49.32 fantasy points. Vick's epic night will go down in football for being the greatest Monday night fantasy game ever. Number 6, LeVeon Bell, December 11th, 2016. LeVeon Bell's snowy explosion in Week 14 of the 2016 season, hands down the star running back's best game of his NFL career. It was quite a snowy day in Buffalo, as there was heavy snow in the forecast all day, making it nearly impossible for either team to establish the pass game. So what did the Steelers do? Yeah, they just handed it off to LeVeon Bell for 38 carries for 236 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. He also contributed in the limited pass game, adding 4 receptions for 62 receiving yards, ending his day with a phenomenal 49.8 fantasy points. This was truly an unforgettable performance for LeVeon, but maybe most for me, because I'm pretty sure my opponent that week had him in his fantasy lineup, and spoiler, I lost that week. Oh yeah, and by the way, maybe most impressive was Bell's 298 total yards was more than the entire Bills team that day, where they had 275 total yards as a team. Sick. Number 5, Marshall Faulk, October 22nd, 2002. Considered one of the greatest running backs of all time, Marshall Faulk always had a knack for big-time performances. However, in the last of his 7 pro seasons, Faulk had the game of his life versus the Seahawks in 2002, totaling 183 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns on 32 carries. Not to mention he added 52 yards receiving and 1 reception for a touchdown for good measure, which is no surprise because Marshall Faulk is arguably the best pass-catching running back of all time. This amazing performance totaled 51 fantasy points for his owners and belongs in the Single Fantasy Game Hall of Fame. Number 4, Doug Martin. Doug who? Yes, Doug Martin had arguably the greatest fantasy day for a rookie in Week 9 of 2012 against his hometown team, the Oakland Raiders. Now, most of us will remember Doug Martin as the player who we drafted in early rounds of fantasy drafts, thinking he could be a big part of our team, but ended up disappointing us in a big way. But he did have a fantastic rookie season, highlighted by him running for 251 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns on the ground, alongside 4 receptions for 21 yards against Oakland in 2012. So although Doug Martin's career will mostly be remembered for being a letdown, this fantasy game worth 53.2 fantasy points will firmly be entrenched in the history books. Number 3, Jimmy Smith, September 10th, 2000. Arguably the greatest fantasy game from a wide receiver in the 21st century came from the greatest wide receiver in my Jacksonville Jaguars history in Jimmy Smith. A lot of people nowadays seem to forget how great of a player Jimmy Smith was. In 14 seasons, Smith totaled over 12,000 receiving yards alongside 5 Pro Bowl appearances and 7 consecutive 1,000-yard receiving seasons. However, the highlight of his great career was Smith's Week 2 performance against the Ravens in 2000. Smith in this game caught a surreal 15 passes for 291 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, totaling a jaw-dropping 54.6 fantasy points. Even more impressive was that it came against the Baltimore Ravens, who that year would go on to win the Super Bowl because of their legendary defense. Yes, the Jags may have lost that game, but still, I guarantee you owners who started Jimmy Smith that week didn't lose their fantasy matchup. Number 2, Shaun Alexander, September 29th, 2002. Maybe one of the more underrated running backs ever, Shaun Alexander had a surreal 5-season stretch in which he had at least 1,175 rushing yards and 14 or more rushing touchdowns in each of those seasons. And one of the most notable games displaying his dominant stretch was in Week 4 of 2002 against the Vikings of Minnesota. In this sick performance, the OG Beast Mode ran for 139 yards on the ground alongside 4 rushing touchdowns. But wait, there's more. The former Seahawk bell cow added 3 catches for 92 air yards and a receiving touchdown. The final fantasy total for Alexander would be 54.6 points, exactly like Jimmy Smith's, but this is ranked higher for me because Alexander's game was higher in non-PPR leagues than Smith because Smith had 15 receptions, which in half-point or full-point per reception leagues helps add to the total points significantly. So yeah, Alexander was truly amazing in this performance. All right, and coming in at the #1 greatest fantasy performance of the 21st century is going to come from Clinton Portis on December 7th, 2003. On a fateful night on December 7th of the 2003 NFL season, Clinton Earl Portis of the Denver Broncos had the greatest fantasy game since the calendar turned to 2000. He went off for 218 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Excuse me? Can you say that again, Jax? Yes, 5 rushing touchdowns and 2 catches for 36 yards for good measure. But an all-time record 5 rushing touchdowns on the ground was the standout, leading to an unfathomable 56.4 fantasy points. And this helped the Broncos clinch a playoff spot versus the Chiefs. So in real life or fantasy, this game earns Portis the gold medal for 21st century performances. Alright guys, this is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more great sports videos in the future. And as always, oh by the way, yeah, last thing. For those of you who have seen my previous videos, you're probably wondering, hey, this is a new setup for you, you know, it looks good. Yeah, so I decided, well, I'm just in a different section of my room. I just decided that this was the best look because in the background it looks nice with all my sports stuff, and also it just looks better visually because like the lighting kind of looks better at this angle. So yeah, I think in the future this is where I'm going to be filming. But yeah, I'm really happy about that. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching and take care.